I think a lot of times, especially as we grow, we don't really know what's going on. The bigger you get, the harder it is to know what's going on and how you're really doing. You may know your financial numbers. You may see some people smiling around the business or unhappy around the business. But to really know definitively, objectively about the business, it's be great to have a system. And the system that we most recommend is called Net Promoter System, or NPS. Today's show is all about how to implement NPS, not as a simple metric, but as a whole system for understanding what's going on with your business and making it better. This is not a talk with an expert guru, but it's a case study talk with another entrepreneur on what they did, how it changed the business, how it made it better, and the practical things that you can do to implement this in your business. So listen in. Hello and welcome again to the Scaling Up Business Podcast. I'm your host and growth coach, Bill Gallagher. On the show with me today is another entrepreneur CEO who's going to talk about the implementation of the NPS system, the Net Promoter System, how they do it in their business, what they learn from it. This is not a case study of a perfect example. This is somebody who's done quite a bit with it for some time and who's still working with it. I want to welcome to the show a dear friend and a student of all good business practices, Sturdy McKee. Sturdy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bill. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So Sturdy is his business is San Francisco Sport and Spine Physical Therapy, and you've been using NPS for 5 to 6 years now, yeah, haven't you?
Yes, yeah, we implemented it about 5 years. It may even be 6 years ago. Into the business.
So we're going to talk about the business insights you've had from it, how you've done it operationally, some of the ways you're addressing both promoters and detractors, and hopefully that'll give some of our listeners some ideas of how to turn it into more than a number. I've had some clients and people that I interact with, people in our accelerator programs, think of the NPS as simply a number, and they like it because there's some industry comparables to look at. But it's more of a whole system for improving your business overall. And that's what I really want to address. That's why I'm excited to have you on the show today to talk about that and how to make it work. Before we get into that, why don't you give folks a little bit of background? You know, when did you become an entrepreneur? How did you start San Francisco Sport and Spine? Give a little background on yourself and the business.
Thanks. Yeah, we've talked a little bit, and I think I was an entrepreneur before I knew what the word was. Like you, when I was 10 years old, I was selling candy at school. I bought a lawnmower at 12 and was mowing lawns and stuff. I've always been doing something. Even when I had a job, there was always kind of a side hustle or gig or something I was interested in or planning or doing or what have you. And I've had a couple different businesses, but the private practice, the company, I've gone out. There had been kind of an implosion at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, where I worked there. They had merged with Stanford, and there was a demerger. They got divorced and split up the medical centers. And at that time, a bunch of people, I think more than 2/3 of the outpatient rehab department got cut. And that was one of those moments in time where I went out and looked for other jobs. I was one of the last to get cut, and went and interviewed and came home and just talked to my wife about I really don't want to work for any of these people, any of these opportunities I've looked at. What do you think about going out and just me doing it on my own? And that was way earlier than I ever thought I would go into practice for myself. I was probably only 3 years out of school at that point, out of grad school, and but I did, and it worked, and did that for about 2 years solo, just me, and then. After about 2 years, had an opportunity to open another location and teamed up with another therapist, and we opened up a clinic in the Marina District. So and he still had his, and I still had mine. So the two of us had 3 locations, and did a very typical kind of E-Myth crash course in entrepreneurship. We decided to do this thing and had no training or background in management. Didn't know the first thing about hiring people or growing a business that way. And meanwhile, we're running around to different locations and stuff. So we very much learned early on through the School of Hard Knocks, and really when we went outside of the profession of physical therapy to learn more about business, that's when things really changed for us. That's when we became profitable. It's when we, were able to start settling down into a routine and a business that was an actual business, not just us working our tails off, 12 hours a day. And that gave me the opportunity, I guess, to realize that these things that we can learn in business, we can use them however we want. So it fit very well with my desire to learn more and grow more, and as a person, not just as a business, and just kept devouring information and learning from other people, and seeking out new people and coaches and teachers and mentors, and by doing that, we were able to create a much more stable business. And I say stable, I mean, it's been 17 years. It's been up and down like everybody I think experiences. It doesn't mean it's been smooth sailing by any stretch of the imagination. But that's also, I guess, a little bit hopeful. We were more than a decade into the business before we even considered and put in place the NPS process.
Yeah. So let's talk about the NPS thing. You collected a couple different ways. So talk to us about the introduction of it. What tools did you use? The beginning of bringing it into the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were really looking at ways to survey our patients and to learn more about their experience. We have, especially as we had, at one point we had 6 locations and 40 some employees, and you start to lose touch with the frontline contact. And even if you're working with patients, our customers, we didn't know what their experience was across the board, didn't know what was happening, in any kind of disciplined way with what was happening at all the other places and interactions and what have you. So what we had come up with, and was this really complicated, multi-question, involved survey and stuff, and we didn't implement it. We kind of dragged our feet, in part because I just was like, who's going to fill this out? Who's going to complete it? Is it answering the questions we really want?
For people who are brand new to this, right? Net Promoter System, NPS, is really asking one question and then an open end. Now, people complicate it, add more to it, expand it, and so on, but it is an answer to some of the complicated things that you get so little response on. So in the Net Promoter survey question, we ask, how likely are you to recommend this company, this product, service to a friend, to a family member, to whatever? It's the likeliness of recommending 1 to 10. And in that system, we consider 1 to 6 as detractors, 7s and 8s as neutrals, and 9s and 10s as promoters. So net promoters are the number of promoters, the 9s and 10s, the count, less the detractors, the 1 to 6 count. So how many people said 1 to 6? And we subtract that from the other. We divide the remainder by the total surveyed, and we end up with our net promoter score. That becomes an industry comparable number and gives you a percentage of the total that are promoters less detractors. So that's the survey structure and the score. In the system, we're generally ignoring 7s and 8s, and we're looking at the 1 to 6s to see what can we learn from them? Do we need to change our targeting so we don't attract those people? Or is there something wrong operationally or executionally that we need to address that has somebody be unhappy? Is there a specific customer we need to fix or save? So there's all of that. And then the promoters, we want to figure out, how do we get more people like them? How do we get a testimonial, referral, that kind of thing? So we want to leverage the promoters. We want to address the detractors, and the 7s and 8s, you can largely leave them alone. So that's kind of the system, like recapping in a nutshell. Let's go back to your case. So you're implementing this. You want to know the business is now grown to a number of locations you've lost touch with. What are the tools you used? How did you first do it? How has it evolved?
Sure. Well, talking about that complexity of these big involved surveys that people weren't going to answer and weren't sure whether it was going to address our objectives. When I learned about the NPS and the process and how simple it was, and that it was evidence based, that it's been tested and tried, and as you said, you can compare across other companies in your industry, and that was very, very appealing. And even from the get-go, we realized it was a process. It wasn't just a number. And what we did was we worked with a company, well, they were rolling it out, called Strive Labs, and Strive Hub Reach was the product, very much focused on the physical therapy space. But basically, it's an automated email system. One where it's a CRM, basically. You can segment your audience and give relevant information. So we'd also never done newsletters and stuff because they didn't want to spam people with stuff they didn't want. But we could target people and give them relevant information this way. And I liked that, and I liked the automation of the NPS. And what we did was we decided that 2 weeks after the initial evaluation, we would send out the NPS score or question. How likely are you to recommend San Francisco Sport and Spine Physical Therapy to your friends or colleagues or what have you? And that was it, right? And then we did that again at 6 weeks. And the reasoning was, and it turned out to be a really good decision. Not all of our decisions are when we're doing something new. But this worked really well because it gave us a chance to follow up on those people that responded negatively in the first 2 weeks. If something was going wrong, we were able to call them, talk to them, intervene, figure out and solve, that problem or do our best to fix that experience. And then follow up at the 6 weeks to see if we actually had changed it. The good news was there weren't that many people that falling below, but there were. And early on in the implementation, and by the way, we didn't ignore, and still don't, the 7s and 8s. We call all of them. We call anybody who's not a 9 or a 10 because we want it to be awesome. We want the experience to be great. But so anyway, we discovered there were 2 patterns that we were completely unaware of, and the two things were around volunteers and observation, and around students. And what our brand, we've tried to provide a superior experience. And in all seriousness, we're not just saying that we want to be different from kind of your run-of-the-mill medical kind of experience. And our patients expect that of us. And what we found was, well, I'll give you one example. We had a 21-year-old ACL reconstruction patient who was paying out of pocket. He had a high deductible and didn't have benefits with us. And when we talked to him 3 or 4, which isn't, that's not good, and to figure out what was going on.
Right.
So got on the phone with him right away and found out that he was being treated by a student, and the therapist and the student made the decision that we do student rotations and all like most clinics, but I'll go into how we changed things, but he felt that he was paying for the services of a skilled and experienced therapist, and meanwhile he was getting the services from a student, and he had not fully consented to that, and that for us was a huge red flag. Like that's not okay. Among other things, we need to get consent from anybody to have anyone else even present. That was the kind of the thing around the volunteers as well. There were people watching and observing without getting, full consent away from the volunteers. So in case somebody said, no, I don't want them watching, they didn't feel bad about saying that in front of the volunteer, the student, or whoever. So those were the 2 things that we found out, and we did our best to immediately change and fix. And we went to the person who ran the student program and shared it with her, and she's like, well, I don't do that. And like, exactly, you don't, but we don't have a thorough process, across all locations to deal with, to do this consistently. We need to make sure that we're not assuming, that when when we do bring on a student, or when we do have somebody in the practice that's doing volunteer hours, what have you, that we have a documented, consistent process that addresses the needs of the patient, period. And so it allowed us pretty quickly to solve for those and make that better, and make corrections, fix it. So since then, the other good news is, even over the course of several years, there have been very few patterns that we've discovered. There have been one-offs and mistakes and bad experience and what have you that we try to work with and fix. But we've kind of, fortunately, I guess, eliminated like systemic things that were just being done wrong across the board. But we wouldn't know that either without continually, putting this out. And I think, the thing I run into too with talking to other people who haven't implemented this yet, Bill, is, I have to call on all those people. Well, number one, the cool thing was for us, that wasn't a lot of people to start with. It was a couple calls a month that we were trying to fix across several, 6 locations. And even today, out of 100 new patients a month and stuff, we're making 1 call every month or 2. So even though, 0 through 8, we're still making those calls, but there aren't very many of them. And the longer you do it, the fewer and fewer of them there are, because you've addressed the kind of the patterns and the processes and things that don't meet and exceed people's expectations.
Yeah, your score is then improved over time, as well as addressing the systemic kinds of things, right?
They did, but the thing that when we started out, I think we were, I think our initial scores came in like overall for the company at around 80.
Yeah,
a positive 80, which is world class, is what they'll tell you. We were looking across different industries. That was higher than the highest, big company in healthcare was rating at the time and what have you. But fortunately, we didn't know enough to be complacent with that. We were just looking at, okay, so why is it not higher? And as we kept going and going and going, we're in excess. We're well over 90 at this point. Which is awesome, but it's not 100, and I don't know that we'll ever get there. Anybody can truly get there, but we consistently strive for it and try. And aside from, we look at it as a company, but we also look at it by provider, so we can segment it by therapist and see. And in those early days, we had a range of people from the 60s to the 90s, and we wanted to figure out why is that. Why are you running 60s? Especially when we're dealing with someone with experience who's has really good clinical skills. What can we do better to make that patient's experience better? Because they're not always, they're not always in the best position to judge the clinical skills. They're judging the communication, how they're being treated, how they feel about the experience, and those things as well. So
you're using it operationally across clinics, and you're using it in a granular level to look at a specific clinician to see how are they doing. And if somebody is falling behind, you can go address and work with that person to address the communication or service issue that has them falling below it.
Right. And like any, this, like any metric, it doesn't necessarily tell you what's wrong.
Right.
But it does tell you where to look.
Right.
And where to investigate. So then you go do the digging and the differential diagnosis and, figure out on the business side of things what's going on.
So we've got your tracking score, and you're addressing the systemic operational issues. You found the pattern where student practitioners were doing without the express consent of or agreement participation of the patient, and you were able to address that. So that's all on the detractor side and the tracking side. But then you also said something interesting to me as we were getting ready, and you said you encouraged the promoters to go give you a public review. So we know that so many businesses live and die by Yelp and TripAdvisor and things like that today, but you picked out your 9s and 10s and asked them to go review you publicly, yeah? Talk to me about that. How'd you do that? What did that do?
Yeah, that was actually really simple in the system that we put in place. So for those respondents, it's just another was a follow-up email to them the next day saying, thanks so much, for rating us. Glad you're happy. If you have time, would you be so kind as to review us on Google Plus or on Yelp? And we put those links in there. The reason we were looking at Google Plus was for Google rankings and all the things they were coming out with and that type of thing. We already had a presence on Yelp. So I think you can target and kind of choose. But so yes, we did follow up and ask, and it wasn't a hard ask, and it wasn't, we just did it once. So we don't not bothering people and what have you. But and we did get some reviews, and we continue to, but it's not a lot. It's not an avalanche or anything like that. We're also not a retail business with people walking in and out all the time either. We don't have thousands of customers. We have a few hundred at a time. But we did talk about that. But what I still haven't solved for, and what I want to do, is figure out something more, not just to leverage and ask from those people, but to do something more for them as well. And we haven't really figured that out. We've offered a free screen to the promoters and stuff in the past, just as a courtesy, that type of thing, tell you what's going on. But we haven't really figured out how to engage them and make them, feel as special as they've made us feel.
So a couple of things I've seen from other clients that, and they're certainly talked about in the system overall, is to go and see if you can profile those people. So you can ask them for referrals. You can ask them for testimonials. You could pull them up on a Skype call or FaceTime or something like that, and you can take a video testimonial from them that you can use online and in other settings where they talk about the great experience and how you're different and like that. The other thing you can do is go and profile them and figure out what are the common characteristics of the people who love us. Maybe it's specific ailments. Maybe it's age. Maybe it's what their sort of activity or sport interest is. Any number of characteristics that you might find, and you might discover, oh, the people who really love us all have this in common. I've ended up over time, so it can help to get to that. Is like bridging to another thing like the core customer profile. It can help you to determine how to find more people like that and how to target more of them by discovering characteristics. And usually you can do that with a little bit of follow-up or an in-depth interview or a client home or office visit. And you'll notice things about them that they might not think of themselves or volunteer when you're looking at them in that way. So it's worth doing.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, it's a great idea.
We have another company that we've worked with that has a very visible public company in the travel and tourism sector, and they've taken their promoters and asked them to give a positive rating on TripAdvisor, and that goes a huge way to making their marketing sort of self-generative by asking the people who love them to go out and say what they loved about them and so on, and then they incentivize their local shop, their retail outlets for their business with some reward every time they get a positive TripAdvisor review. And that has in every industry, there are things that influence our purchasing decisions, and that's only going to keep growing, right, over time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's next, do you think, in the evolution and your use of the NPS system? How do you see it going now? And
well, basically, I'm taking your idea and kind of merging it with who we think our target customer is and looking at that and basically validating, verifying that we're on the right track or we're doing the right thing for those people particularly. That would be something we could do and should do. Still trying to figure out what else we can do for them to make it an even better experience, whether that's while they're working with us or afterwards, something. I mean, I haven't yet figured out how to maintain and keep, long-term engagement from individuals. We obviously have relationships with other businesses and with physicians and people in the area, but, it's a little bit harder when you get better, go off and do your thing for a year or two, and then maybe you need us again. How do we really provide some kind of value and stay in touch without just spamming and annoying people.
Sure. Well, and obviously the promoters generally don't mind, and the detractors appreciate you reaching out and trying to fix something that they're unhappy about, right? So, which is part of the reason for addressing detractors and promoters and ignoring the others who are just fine but don't have anything particular to say about it. We can focus on that. The other one to bring up for people, I don't know if you've tried this, but I have two clients with, our client companies tend to have a rapidly going employee base, but we have a couple with over 100 employees this quarter where they feel like they're not sure how to close the gap. And for them, there's a version of this that we call Employee Net Promoter Score, or ENPS. And the ENPS system is exactly the same thing. It'd be how likely are you to recommend working at this company to a friend or colleague. And in that system, then we're asking why, and we can look at the people who really love working at the business and encourage them to refer someone they know to work for the business. So ask them to help find people and so on, and figure out who are these people that really love working here, and how do we find more people like them? If they love working here and they perform well, chances are good that we should profile them and figure out how to find more people like them and get them referring their friends to work for the same company. And by the same token, the people who hate us, they should not be there. They should work somewhere else.
Can we fix it? Should we fix it?
Or is there something where they've been wronged, or there's been a problem? There's some systemic problem that we need to address, or are they just not a good fit, right? In either case, there's something to address on the detractor side. So ENPS works great. A tip, you didn't talk about it, but you can go use a simple free tool like SurveyMonkey, and you can enhance it by doing their paid versions as well. And they have some variations on NPS there, and you can use this in a way as your regular tracking collector. So you can do this for free and append it to invoicing statements, follow-ups, customer lists into your CRM. There's a variety of ways to integrate the prompt into the request for the response into that. We're all used to that at this point. So you can integrate that with a simple free tool. Of course, many of the commercial products that are using the CRMs and things like that may have NPS and eNPS as options that you can turn on or enable within that. But it's a really straightforward thing. How likely are you to recommend the purchase or the employment, and why do you say that? And then we simply deal with the two extremes. I want to also turn people on to the book. So if you want to read more about it, more examples and that kind of thing, we took this as a practical case study with a small business, but the book is The Ultimate Question: How Net Promoter Companies Thrive in a Customer-Driven World. The author is Fred Reichheld, and you can find this on Amazon. Fred Reichheld with Bob Markey from Bain & Company. Anyway, there's a lot that you could read and understand about implementing this as a whole system, and I want to encourage folks to do that. We'll put a link to the Amazon book right here. If you want to learn more about Sturdy's business, Sturdy, SF Sport and Spine Physical Therapy, I think you have a web address for that too, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Our web address is sfphysicaltherapy.com.
Awesome. And so if you want to see and learn about the business, or maybe you need help fixing something and you live in the San Francisco Bay Area.
That's what we're here for.
Right? And as always, look, we have all of the tools of scaling up. We have worksheets and instructions and tips and things like that for you on our website at scalingcoach.com. We've also got a free book offer. You can go there and go to the free book offer, and we'll send you a free copy of Scaling Up if you pay the shipping and handling charge, so you can get it, read it, and refer back to it, and so on. And then, of course, we have workshops and things like that on Scaling Up on a regular basis. Just go to scalingcoach.com, and we'll be back here every week with a new podcast episode on some aspect of growing your business and scaling up. Thanks again for being on the show with us today, Sturdy, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
Thank you so much, Bill. Really appreciate it.
One of the things that we didn't cover in today's recording about Net Promoter System, NPS and eNPS, is the notion that you have to talk to people who are unhappy, the detractors. And a lot of folks that implement this are a little bit afraid of this. I want you to know that talking to detractors is not something you have to be afraid of. It's normal and natural, but they will be happy to hear from you. Think about it. When you're unhappy with a business, if they actually reach out to you and ask, what happened? What's going on? How can we fix it? Even if they can't fully fix it, that you're happy with the outreach. So even if you can't satisfy that person, ultimately, they're happy that you made the effort to try. The calls that you do there will be much better than you think. And when you are able to fix something for someone, those people don't go to neutral. They tend to go to ecstatic promoters. If you fix someone who is unhappy, they become a passionate promoter and advocate for your business. They really feel like you care. So that's the thing we want you to know about dealing with detractors on the negative side. I want to give special thanks to our original growth guru, Vern Harnish. Our show is produced by Nye Obeid, and audio production is done by Podfly. Audio editing is done by Albert Burge, and our show notes are compiled by Ein Codina with proofreading by Tim McGowan. If you got some value out of the show today, please share it with somebody else and let us know the parts that you loved. We always love hearing from you and what makes a difference for you. Thanks again for listening, and keep scaling up.